Welcome back everyone, it's your boy Big Man, Big Books. Today I'd like to talk to you about my all-time favourite author, that being the one and only Stephen King. With the upcoming release of his new book coming out in May, it feels like the right time to discuss where to get started with Stephen King, because there's a lot of different answers, a lot of different theories. However, this is what I would feel would be an appropriate way to get started on Stephen King. First off, just a little bit of backstory with my own experience with Mr. King's work. He was the writer that I first kind of got interested in reading because of. I remember being sort of 14, 15 and being on holiday, picking up Carrie, and I absolutely thoroughly enjoyed that book. And then I went on to read Misery and enjoyed it even more, and then it's just been an incredible journey since then, and I've picked up so many more of his books. So this is my kind of comprehensive list of where you should start in terms of getting into Stephen King. And there's no real right or wrong answer here. You know, this is just an opinion. Feel free to disagree. And if you are someone who reads Stephen King and totally thinks that my list is absolutely wrong, well, you know what? You can keep your opinion to yourself, because it is just... So if you are a little bit younger and you want to kind of get a taste for kind of what Stephen King's works are like, not necessarily if you are younger, but, you know, if you are maybe like a late teenager or, you know, sort of coming into adulthood, I would personally suggest reading something like Firestarter or The Institute. These two technically are sequels of one another. The Institute is technically a sequel to Firestarter, but not really. It's just very similar. This is very much kind of where stuff like Stranger Things got their inspiration for, in terms of like characters with superpowers and, you know, secret government kind of facilities. Firestarter is a really great kind of jumping on point for that kind of Stephen King, and The Institute, I feel like, expands on what he wanted to do in Firestarter to a whole new level, and I really, really enjoyed both books. You will find that in the Stephen King kind of world, there is an overlooming kind of presence of a power, often referred to as the Shining. As a result, you get characters throughout the stories that have various abilities, small and large, in different formats. So very much a very similar kind of power structure, but certainly The Institute and Firestarter are some really great places to start. Without spoiling anything, Firestarter follows the story of a father and his daughter on the run from the government. The father has various telepathic abilities, and his daughter is what they call a Firestarter or a pyrokinetic, and that's pretty self-explanatory what she can do. The Institute is another novel that came out a few years ago that follows the story of multiple different children who are taken from their home and are then kept in government facilities because they have various levels of powers, whether that be telepathic or telekinetic. So yeah, both stories are very, very entertaining and a great starting on point, especially if you are a little bit younger, especially if you are trying to get more of what people refer to in terms of the inspiration of stuff like Stranger Things. Moving forward, if you want to dive into Stephen King because you've heard, hey, this guy can write some scary books, well, let me put you on some good ones. Now, to just name one or two or three or five, there are so many of his books that are terrifying, and that's what he's originally known for. Now, for me personally, some of the scariest Stephen King books I've ever read would be something like Pet Sematary, which is the story of a young family whose cat is killed, is run over. They then bury the cat in a local pet cemetery set up by some neighbourhood kids many generations back, and as a result, what happens? Oh yeah, the cat comes back. Now you think on the surface that would sound pretty naff, and you know, you'd be right. I put off reading this book for many years. Because I just thought it sounded silly. In actual fact, I was completely wrong. The story is absolutely superb. It doesn't just sort of deal with, you know, this really kind of scary thing. There's a lot more to it. It really delves into grief. It really made me understand grief in a different light and how people can react to grief on different scales. It's a tough read at times, but equally it really does shine a light on some really kind of topics that we don't really focus on too much. If you're into stuff like Yellow Jackets, that's got a similar sort of vibe in that respect. So yeah, Pet Sematary is a top class book, probably one of my favourite horror books of all time. If you're looking for grand epic scale fantasy adventure, I would absolutely suggest The Stand by Stephen King, which is a humongous kind of apocalyptic story that on the surface is, the story of the population becoming ill with an unknown disease that wipes out something like 90% of the population. The other half of it is this is a biblical storyline, good versus evil at the forefront of a larger scale story, absolutely dribbling with biblical undertones. The Stand was something that when I read it, you realise how special this book is when you start it. When you really get into kind of the nitty gritty of the story, you realise, I'm in for a journey and I have no intention of speeding through this. I'm going to take my merry time, and that is absolutely the case with The Stand. It was the best book I read last year, hands down. Also heavily ties into other works such as The Dark Tower. Not something we're going to discuss too much today. I will make a separate video about The Dark Tower, which is its own category in its own right. Another classic sort of horror book I would also be suggesting as well is Salem's Lot. This is your classic take on a vampire story. The town of Jerusalem's Lot is being overrun by vampires because of a new visitor who turns out to be, you guessed it, a vampire. This is Stephen King's take and homage to classic Dracula, and Salem's Lot is an absolute belter of a story. Really, really enjoyed it. Really enjoyed the characters. If you've ever seen Midnight Mass, that is a very similar story to Salem's Lot, which makes total sense because the creator of Midnight Mass and Haunting of Hill House is a massive Stephen King fan, so you can tell that's got some heavy inspiration. If you're looking for something that doesn't necessarily have too much of a supernatural element to it, as a lot of people know, Stephen King is really great at writing horrific human beings that have no supernatural side to them at all. I would suggest picking up Misery. As I say, that was the second book I ever read of Stephen King's, and I still think it stands up to today. I think it's a fantastic story. I felt I was in the room with Paul Sheldon that entire book. The story obviously follows a writer named Paul Sheldon. Side note, you will find that Stephen King, a lot of his characters are writers. Paul Sheldon writes some books called the Misery novels, which are, kind of very popular books, but nothing really amazing. And the writer wants to kind of break away from these stories, so he kills off the main character, Misery, to sort of end his saga of writing these books. Subsequently, he is in a car crash on a mountain and is saved by a woman who picks him up and takes her to her home, only to find out that she is the biggest fan of the Misery novels. Obviously, you think that sounds incredible. However, things take a turn for the worse, as you can imagine, when she reads the final draft of his book and decides to go absolutely nuts. More things are revealed about Annie Wilkes, the woman who saved him. I'm sure you're aware of a lot of this already because it is such a huge part of popular culture. We've all seen the, Family Guy episode, and there's a pretty solid adaptation of it as well if you want to check that out. If you're looking for a series to kind of follow along with, I would also suggest looking at the Finders Keepers trilogy, which is the story of Bill Hodges, who is a detective who is solving various crimes. He's an ex-cop, he's now a private eye, and he's hired to solve various sort of crimes and cases. Some have a supernatural element to it, very, very minimal, very, very entertaining, and very, very good fun. And the series kind of takes a bit of a follow-on from there. We have a character in those stories called Holly Gibney. Holly Gibney's become sort of a almost like a regular character in Stephen King books. She appeared in the original Finders Keepers series. She had a spin-off short story in If It Bleeds, an appearance in The Outsider, I believe, and then more recently he's released his book Holly, which is a full story about Holly solving a murder mystery of people going missing. And of course the new book that comes out in May is another Holly Gibney story. So not everyone's everyone's cup of tea. I know some people aren't massive fans of the Holly Gibney stuff. I personally really like it. So if you're looking for kind of a continuous series that's not too intense, Finders Keepers is where to get started. Follow on from there to see the spin-offs with Holly Gibney as well. Again, there are so many Stephen King books that I've not mentioned here. People are going to not be happy, but certainly that's where I think you should get started, or rough ideas of kind of the sort of stories he produces. You know, he doesn't just produce horror, he does various sort of genres. So it's just important to sort of know what you like and where to get started. And then you can start on the bigger stuff, you know, The Shining, It, you know, all the things that everyone knows him for. But certainly that's my personal list in terms of where I would suggest you get started. Feel free to tell me I'm wrong in the comments. Otherwise, thank you for watching. Take care. Please subscribe. Goodbye.